This is the image that we were working on in the protocols, global, broad, and local. And I left it the way I left it in a way that it had all the different layers showing, and it's important for this particular lesson because we're really going to be working in layers, and we're going to be working in a different kind of layer than the one that I created in the last videos. The last videos we were looking at making major changes in parts of the layer. So for example, if you look at this particular layer, we did some major changes to the foreground, and you'll notice that that information is just gone. We erased it. We used the erase tool, and when I click it back in, you can see how it merges with the background layer to create the kind of effect that we wanted. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing this technique, and when I first started teaching Photoshop to students, I like to use this technique because it's very intuitive. You understand what's going on because you used an erase tool to reveal the background layer and so on. So it has its place, and it has a real application in the learning process. But what we want to do ultimately is we want to be able to look at this layer and say, actually I would like some of that information to be back in here. Okay, what I mean by that, I would like to have some pixel information restored back into this layer. Now we can't do that if we've used our erase tool. It's just not possible. And even using our history to go back is not really a good option because you may have multiple steps in between the step that you want to edit again and where you are currently. So what Photoshop has done is created a different kind of layer, and that's called an adjustment layer. And adjustment layers has a palette that looks like this, and you'll find that in Window. You go up to Windows and click on Adjustments. And what adjustments are, just very, very simply, it's a repeat of what you have done up in here. You'll notice that this is called adjustments, and you have brightness, levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, and all that. Well, that's exactly what you see in here. If you scroll over these little icons here, you'll actually see that that's exactly what's going on here. So you've got brightness, levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, saturation, and so on. Now, the nice thing about adjustment layers is that if we make an adjustment layer and we want to go back and change it, we can do so. So for example, I could go back into this layer right here if it was an adjustment layer, and I could paint back in information here. So for example, if I was 3 or 4 steps down and I realized that, wait a minute, I could use a little bit more information in this one area, I can go back and I can replace that information. So we call that non-destructible editing. And that just makes sense. We have destroyed information in this particular layer. If we can get it back, we'll just simply call it non-destructive. And that's what Photoshop actually calls it, although they call them adjustment layers in the palette box here. So to do that, what I'd like to do is I'm going to open up a new image for this little demonstration. And I'm going to look at this image right here that I photographed a while back, and again I'm going to have a look at this image in my full screen mode because I want to look at it and say, okay, well, what are the changes that I'd like to see? Well, I like the foreground. It's okay. I could maybe have a little bit more information in the face, but the dark areas up here are a little bit too dark, and I wouldn't mind having a little bit more information in here. It just seems like it drops off pretty rapidly here, and so I'd like to rebuild some of that information in here, make it a little bit more lighter, I think is what I should be doing there. So to do that, I would then look at my layers palette, have that open, and then I would have my adjustment palette open as well. And because I'm concerned about this area up here, I'm just going to make that visible. Now what I would do is I would use my levels to give me a layer that is lighter. So again, here's your histogram exactly as you would see it in your levels palette up here, and I'm just going to move the slider to the left to open up that area up on top. And again, you don't have to be too specific about this because we will be using a brush, and that brush will have transparency. You'll see in a minute how we can be pretty specific about what we want to have changed. Now, by doing that, you'll notice that this layer up here looks quite different from the other layers that you created. In fact, there's no real image in here to suggest what that looks like, but we do have this looks like a window pane here. And the idea of having this little window pane here is that this is going to help us see what it is that we're doing in terms of our edit. Now, what does that mean? Well, adjustment layers work like this. They don't use an erase tool. In fact, they use the paintbrush with black and white as the two modes of operation. So for example, if I click on my black, which I have open right now, let me just move this out of the way. I've got black here right now. If I take my brush tool, and in my brush tool here, I'm going to just leave it very hard and very big brush here, and leave it at 100%. And you can see what I'm going to do here is I'm going to erase part of the foreground layer. Now remember, the foreground layer, or this layer that I created, is a levels layer. It's lighter, and by taking the black brush here, I've actually erased, I've erased the top layer. Now if I default click here, make it white, and go back in here, you can see that I'm actually painting back in that foreground layer. So what's nice about these adjustment layers is that you can go in here and you can make changes, and if you don't like the change that you made, you can go back and redo it. So for example, if I wanted to lighten that background, I would use a brush pretty much where it is right now, but I would definitely make it a lot softer, and I would make it a little bit more gradual, and then I would just sort of move in this area here. Well, let me pick the right brush color. Black. Black is going to erase that top layer. Alright, so if I wanted to make it darker, I would make it darker, right? If I wanted to make it lighter, I paint in the light values up here. If I wanted to maintain the foreground with the nice rich colors that were there in the original layer, I can just sort of click in here and then rebuild these nice warm colors in the bottom or the foreground of this composition or photograph. So I'm just going to taking my brush and just brushing back and forth to kind of add those richer colors into the foreground. So what I've done is, if you look at my layers palette here, if you look closely in here, you'll actually see the grays that I've created here are a result of using the black brush with some transparency. So because I have 39% transparency, it's not going to be black, it's going to be gray in here. So the idea is that black will erase the top layer, white will build it back in, right? If I wanted to, let's just go back here, click on white, and let's just make that a really hard brush again and turn that to 100%. If I go back in here, you can see that I'm just rebuilding that foreground layer, and you can actually see the changes that I've done right here. So the nice thing about adjustment layers is that you have the ability to go back and forth and make changes. So if I wanted to make changes to the values of my picture here as my first change, I could do that. I could go back and forth and make it exactly the way I want. I could use my transparency, I could use my brush size to very specifically make the changes that I want. And then again, I can also add, if I wanted to, another adjustment layer on here. Alright, so I could just take my adjustment layer and say, I'm going to add some saturation to this image. Okay, so make sure that you're on the right layer. I can also take that layer that I created previously and tuck it underneath my saturation, and if I do that, then if I change my saturation, it will actually in fact change the entire image. So you can see that I'm actually just going to really exaggerate that. So again, back and forth. You can play around with this until you find just the right amount of added saturation that you want. So if I want to just adjust the saturation, I can do that. If there's parts of the image that I don't want to have saturated, right, I can actually change that by making it a black brush, and I can sort of take out some of the saturation that I don't want. Again, the black brush is going to take away what you did. White's going to build it back in. So you could just sort of keep on building and working on your image to develop the kind of look that you want, and then you can always go back and forth. So for example, I could go back into my levels layer, and I can change that a little bit, and then go back here and alter that a bit with my brush, and I can toggle back and forth. And that's the wonderful thing about adjustment layers, is they do enable you to make all of these changes and then come back and say, well, you know what, that wasn't quite exactly how I would do it. You know, if I'm going to add some saturation here, maybe I should back off the levels and so on. So it really opens up a lot of potential to really work on your image and develop a really well thought out correction. So those are adjustment layers. And again, in adjustment layers, you can use your protocols as you would. Start with levels and then work your way through the various different changes that we've done. You would do exactly the same as you did in protocols, but the only difference is you would stack all your different layers and all your changes as adjustment layers. So that's adjustment layers, and we're going to come back and we're going to look at adjustment layers, and we're going to play around with them a little bit more in the next video.